Greetings all. In today's video, I want to do a short introduction to decision analysis. I hope to give you a little background on why it's important, why a lot of folks think that it's very helpful, and hopefully give you some encouragement to look beyond what we cover in class as far as popular press treatments and some of the additional streams of research that might be helpful and interesting. Now, if you think about your early introductory psychology classes and courses similar to that, you've probably been introduced to all the different cognitive biases and issues with decision-making processes that we deal with. I know it's not popular in higher education to promote Wikipedia, but I think it has some value. And if you go to Wikipedia and you do a search on cognitive biases, you'll find a very nice page. It's got a lot of information and just really long lists of cognitive biases that have some empirical basis to them. Dozens upon dozens of cognitive biases, decision-making biases. I have listed some of the categories for these processes on this slide. We have individual biases. Obviously, we have issues when we try to make decisions in groups. Memory is fraught with peril. And then, if you think about it from a purely quantitative approach, statistically, there's a lot of biases and there's a lot of things that we don't always process very well. And so, if you're coming to the MBA program from a different field, you might want to check some of this out. I think most people have had some exposure to it, but in business, we take quite a bit of time and care in thinking about these things. In particular, from the business side of things, we have a large literature and research field in organizational behavior. Industrial and organizational psychologists contribute a lot to this. We also have behavioral economics, and there's even some research in behavioral accounting in different fields, behavioral finance, that all deal with the processes and the difficulties we have in taking information, manipulating it and using it to make decisions, and hopefully making our outcomes effective and efficient. So for those of you that are interested in this, there's a lot more that you can explore, and I highly invite you to do that. Now, when we're thinking about decision-making processes and decision analysis from a quantitative perspective, we can think about it in terms of certainty, risk, and uncertainty. Our textbook, the Render et al. Textbook, talks about decisions where we know with a lot of confidence what the particular outcomes are from different alternatives, right? And those examples are things like bond investments, right? If you look at the coupon rate on a bond, you know that if you invest $1,000, you'll get 10% back, right? That's something that with certainty if you hold the financial instrument to its maturity. In other situations, we don't have that certainty. We can't rely on that. And from a decision analysis perspective, that's when we start talking about things like maxi-max criterion and maxi-min criterion and the Hurwitz criterion, Laplace, and the like. Those are not certain, right? There's a measure of uncertainty there, but we do have some information. Now, if we take uncertainty and compare that with decision-making under risk, well, basically, we're talking about the application of probabilities. When we're looking at a decision-making environment under risk, we have probabilities, or we believe we have reasonable probabilities that we can apply to certain situations, right? So, we move from knowing for sure what we're going to get to a situation where we're not sure and there's options, to a situation where, okay, based on educated guess or mathematical models or something like that, we have some probabilities we can associate with the different alternatives that we're weighing, and that provides us with another level of information that we can incorporate into our decision making. Okay. When we talk more about specific examples of decision analysis, we'll see, what the presence or absence of probabilities can allow us to do, and what additional calculations and what additional information we can generate from that. Beyond that quantitative approach to decision making, there's some other things that we as MBA graduates need to be aware of, right? Most folks come into a master's degree, an MBA degree, with the idea that at some point they're going to be influential in their organization. They're going to be a decision maker, right? And so things we need to consider beyond the quantitative matters are things like, is the decision inconsequential or is it consequential, right? Now, you can make the argument that all decisions are consequential, but we're thinking about terms of delegation here, right? It is a particular decision that needs to be made. Is that something that you really need to hold on to and be in charge of and take ownership of? Or is that something that you can push out to somebody else, someone else in your sphere of influence, and give them an opportunity to demonstrate some leadership and demonstrate some initiative and proactivity, right? So, we need to be thinking about, okay, when we have a decision, what can we do with it? What are our options as far as, is that something that we have to make sure that we're dealing with, or can we rely on somebody else to help us and make decisions that might empower somebody else? Another issue that we look at when we're thinking about decision making is, some decisions are very simple. They have just a few pieces. The outcomes are fairly straightforward. In the most rudimentary sense, they're simple, right? In other situations, and particularly when you start, occupying leadership positions, decisions become much more complex, right? A lot of moving parts, a lot of different alternatives, a lot of different consequences to be aware of. And so, again, we need to think about, okay, is a decision simple? Is it complex? Do we have a good understanding of the two, enough that we can make that determination? And then based on that, what are the potential pitfalls for something like that? We may see a decision as black and white and very simple, but there could be some underlying nuance there that we haven't considered. And so we need to be careful, regardless of our initial categorization of these decision types, to make sure that we're given the due diligence that's needed. And then finally, just as another example, do we have the opportunity to take our time and be slow and methodical in our decision-making process? Or has something occurred so quickly and so abruptly that we have to make a decision right now? And it has to be the right decision. If you talk to a lot of folks just a few years ago, a lot of folks did not have a contingency plan for a global pandemic. But what they found out very quickly is during its onset, things had to be approached differently, and situations had to be adjusted, and difficulties had to be overcame in order to maintain a viable presence in the market. Sometimes we have a good understanding of how much time we have and what the time frame is for a decision. Other times we don't. But again, that's one of those things that you have to consider when you're in a leadership position, because that's not something that you want to fumble. Now, these are not the only considerations for decision making and decision making processes, but they are some of the things that come up very often. And so, it's worth thinking about as you start exploring decision analysis and some of the techniques that we cover with these issues in mind, right? Think about how you would behave or how you would respond in certain situations given limited information or given a wealth of information. How are you going to process that? What are you looking for? How are you going to minimize potential mistakes? Okay. Obviously, there's a lot more that can be covered, but this is a good start and it helps us think about some things. Now, I want to give you a few examples of additional material that you can explore, particularly if you're interested in doing this kind of work, maybe as a consultant, or that in your current position or the position that you want, you're going to be faced with difficult decisions and complex decisions, and you want to have a little bit more content, a little bit more exposure to different techniques and approaches that you can use for this. Now, obviously, our exploration of decision analysis in the Render et al. Text is fairly significant, right? It's an entire chapter and it has a lot of pieces to it. But the reality is decision analysis could be its own course. It's a very broad field that incorporates a lot of different disciplines in it. A good resource for somebody that wants to take maybe an advanced graduate, maybe a doctoral level understanding of decision analysis is the Decision Analysis for Management Judgment text. Goodwin and Wright, it's a Wiley book, does some really neat things, and it's something that I rely on when I get stuck with a particular problem. We talk about decision tables and decision trees in the Render et al. Text. They take a much broader swath of techniques in this text. They cover the tables and the trees, but they also talk about analytical hierarchies and advanced treatments and advanced uses and applications of decision analysis. So it's a more involved treatment, but it's written very well. It's got a lot of information and it's got a much broader path that you can explore than what we have. Now, if we're thinking about popular press treatments, there are a couple of really nice books out there that I want to bring your attention to. And the first one is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. I was first introduced to Kahneman and his longtime research partner, Amos Tversky, in graduate school. And probably even before that, even though I wasn't aware of their specific names. These folks, if they didn't outright found the field of behavioral economics, then they highly influenced it. They've been doing work since the late 1970s, maybe even earlier than that. Amos Tversky died a few years ago, and after his death, Kahneman was awarded the Nobel Prize, but I believe strongly that if he had been alive at the time, he would have shared the prize with him. They have done some really interesting work on decision analysis and problems we have when given quantitative measures and how we analyze that and the decisions we make for it. They do a lot with game theory and a lot with economic indicators, things like investments and choosing $10 now versus $100 10 years from now, things like that. Very interesting work that they've done for many, many years. Very, very impactful stuff. The Thinking Fast and Slow book is sort of I don't want to say summary, that's not the correct word, but it is it's a treatment of the broader field of psychology and behavioral economics that is accessible. It's not overly technical, it's not overly quantitative, but they go through a lot of research and display it in layman's terms so that you can understand the basics of some of the experiments that were run, what the conclusions from those experiments are, and how you can apply that to your own decision-making processes. It's very much written for folks in leadership positions because it points out some of the fallacies that we all have. It gives some nice tips and techniques on how to minimize those and how to improve our processes. It's a very nice treatment of some very technical stuff. At the end of the book, they actually include some of the primary sources, right? So they include some of the original research, some of the original journal articles. So not only do you get to see their summation and their interpretation of the work, but you actually get to see some of the original work in all of its glory. It is well worth your time. I have purchased a hard copy of the book. I also purchased the Audible version, and it's really well done. So, if this is something you think you might be interested in, this is a really nice treatment. Another highly influential researcher that has published several books is Dan Ariely. I chose the Predictably Irrational bundle because I bought that several years ago, and it's a really nice treatment of behavioral economics. Ariely is a very interesting character. He is a psychology and behavioral economist at Duke University. He actually has 2 PhDs. He has one PhD in psychology and another PhD in marketing. And he has a very big presence on LinkedIn. He's I guess you could say he's reached superstar status. He's very visible, shares a lot of his work. He's done several TED Talks, I believe, and he is another one of those researchers that takes some complicated phenomena and makes it accessible to larger audiences. He's written several books. Again, if this is something that you're interested in, he's actively researching and working now. It is well worth your time to explore a little bit. So I've given you some fodder for further exploration as far as actual written material, right? So you've got the decision analysis book, a textbook that you can explore, a couple of popular press treatments that do a nice job of interpreting and demonstrating some of the research in behavioral economics and psychology. Just a couple of suggestions for those that are interested. Once we start looking at the specific examples of decision analysis and working some problems with that, you'll find that in the render it all text, they have a process that they walk through that they recommend that you overlay on any decision-making problem. What you'll find is throughout that text, they often have these stepwise procedures that they apply to different techniques. But nearly all of them start with the same element, and that is to define the problem, okay? When you're defining the problem, whether you're working on homework, whether you're doing a consulting gig, whether you're writing a paper, if you don't define the problem correctly, obviously everything that you do after that is going to be, at best, non-optimal. At worst, it can be completely wrong. So definitely, spend some time when you're engaged in this type of work, making sure that you define the problem and that you take some care and some diligence in doing that. The other thing that's a common pitfall that I want you to be aware of as we go into the mechanics of decision analysis is always list all the options. The textbook makes this recommendation. Just about every other textbook that deals with this and the empirical research that I'm aware of that deals with the decision analysis all suggest the same thing, and that is if we limit our response set or our option set, we're going to miss out on effective and efficient decision-making processes. So, just like defining the problem is very important in order not to limit the scope of what you're doing, listing all the options is very important to make sure that you know what you're able to do, right? And that's something that everybody needs to be aware of. So definitely when you start working problems in this area, keep those two things in mind. Now, finally, just some additional recommendations in research. Some areas that I have done work in particular, and I'm happy to discuss with anybody. TMT diversity. TMT stands for Top Management Team. And there is a large and impactful body of research that suggests, as you would expect, that having homogeneous top management teams leads to suboptimal decision outcomes, right? When we're thinking about the C-suite or the board of directors or anybody at the top of the organization, when we look at that group, we want to have diversity of experience, diversity of opinion, diversity of background. For most of us, it seems very intuitive that you would want different perspectives on a decision-making team, but we still see that a lot of the tops of organizations are very homogenous, and that's something that you do at your own risk, right? We want to be a little broader in our purview and provide opportunities for different people. And we have research and we have evidence to suggest that improves performance, financial, accounting, all different types of organizational performance metrics. So that's something that you should keep aware of, and that's something that you could explore a little bit on your own as you move forward through the program and out into the world. Another area that is of interest to me, and that's something that I have found very interesting, is chaos theory and complexity science. Chaos theory is, comes from the natural sciences, biological and chemical and physics systems that suggest small perturbations in a system lead to very immense consequences. And from that basis in chaos theory, complexity science is a fairly recent field in business that talks about, okay, what can we do when we have simple explanations, simple parameters, simple guidance, and we move within a system. How does that affect business operations, and how does that affect leadership, and how does that affect management? It's a really interesting field. It's something that's a little bit unusual. It's not something that a lot of people know a lot about. It's not something that you hear about every day, but there's some really interesting applications for complexity science in business that's still growing. It's a growing field, and it's got a lot of promise to it. Off the top of my head, there's a book called Surfing the Edge of Chaos. That's a popular press treatment that talks about the application of chaos theory in business, and it's got some really good examples in it. It's a few years old now. I think it came out in the late 90s, but it's still got some really good lessons to learn. So if you're interested, definitely check that out. And then finally, I'll give you my own selfless plug. When I was in graduate school, I was fortunate to work with Dr. Dondi Plowman. She is a decision analysis researcher, and I was able to work on several projects with her. And one of the projects that we worked on together was a paper looking at decision-making processes in large hospitals in Texas. And what we were looking at specifically was, given a particular decision-making process that's found in the literature and that Dr. Plowman had worked with in the past, what could we say about this decision-making process and its relationship to organizational performance, right? How could we relate decision making to financial performance. And so what I've got on this slide here in that last bullet point is the process that we use, the decision-making process that we explore. It's a stage-wise process that begins with raising issues. You move into clarifying issues. Once you've clarified the issues, you generate alternatives. Then there's a process for evaluating alternatives, and then ultimately you make your decision, right? You choose your alternative that you want to employ. And what we found was, oddly enough, that for the first three stages, right, you want as many people as possible involved in that, right? You want that diversity, you want that that wider purview, that difference of opinion when you're raising issues and clarifying issues and generating alternatives. That was related positively with organizational performance. But as you get toward the end of the process where you're evaluating alternatives, excuse me, and choosing alternatives, at that point, having a lot of voices is not necessarily optimal, because, ultimately somebody has to make a decision. And the idea is, once you've gotten as much information as you can handle, or as much information as is available, then somebody or a small group of folks are going to have to make a decision. All right. And I think anybody that's worked in a team or worked in a group setting knows that not everybody can be happy all the time in a situation like that. So you ultimately have to provide a little impetus to some, and maybe a little less impetus to others. But our findings in that research was, for the ultimate, or not ultimate, but for the more optimal financial performance, there's a little bit less participation toward the end of that process. That's another paper that's available, and I'm happy to share it with you. I hope this has given you a little bit to think about. I hope it primes your curiosity as we get into decision analysis. It's a very deep field. There's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of application that's available. So hopefully we have something that will interest everybody. Everybody, good luck. Thank you.